are back and ready to go with Erica Fava from Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. Once again, I'd like to thank Gorman Controls Limited for sponsoring this session. And I will turn the mic over to Erica when you're ready.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. I'm delighted to be here today. I'm speaking on behalf of AAFC's potato breeding team. I'm the coordinating biologist and industry liaison for the program. I work alongside Dr. David DeCoyer, who is a potato breeder, and we're supported by a really great team. The work I will talk to you about today is certainly not mine alone, but represents the effort and accomplishments of many, many people. So essentially during this presentation, I want to tell you a very few brief points about our program's recent history, and then tell you a little bit about our efforts to modernize our program by applying new science. I'll tell you a bit about the national potato variety trials and touch on where we're at with our new commercialization models. And then finally, I'll show some of our newly licensed varieties and then wrap up to tell you how growers can give feedback that informs the breeding decisions, the breeding decision making that goes into delivering better varieties faster. So at AAFC, we have been breeding potatoes for more than 100 years. So I'm going to fast forward to the early beginnings of the 1990s. We began to release our varieties in a mechanism called the Accelerated Release Open House. This mechanism served us well for many years, but things change and we needed to change as well. So by 2017, we were seeing that it was really time to do things differently. One of the best ways to know how you might need to change is to get the perspective from independent experts, and that's exactly what we did. We brought a team of world-class breeding experts to review every part of our program and make recommendations. The review, quite honestly, was really tough information to hear, but it also showed us that making small changes wasn't going to cut it. We really needed to overhaul our whole program. So we made a plan to do so, called our potato breeding modernization, and this plan encompasses changes in our science, our equipment, the way we approach partnerships, our commercialization models, and how we determine what makes the cut for release. As part of this modernization, we're introducing some exciting innovations, and we'll get to a few examples of those a bit later. So to go into just a little bit more detail, we're integrating all of the most up-to-date science. To be honest, we had fallen behind in taking the science developments from our own scientists and mainstreaming them into our program. So this was a bit of catching up for us. And also we've started adopting a culture of just continuous improvement. We also realized that sometimes our methods or our equipment weren't reflecting industry practice, and we're fixing that. Because of our, if our methods aren't going to give data that someone else growing and processing our varieties will get, it can be very frustrating. So making these changes gives confidence to our data and our results. We also took a number of outdated subjective methods and replaced them with more objective, consistent methods. And we took to heart the need to work better with our partners. We adjusted our approach to work collaboratively towards better varieties. Part of working better with partners is about co-developing the mechanisms for licensing varieties and bringing them to market. And equally important is to the endeavor is making sure that we're welcoming, gathering, and hearing important feedback from every part of the breeding pipeline. So to give you a few examples of the exciting innovations we're bringing to the program, it may seem simple, but in the past, we judged color of potatoes by eye, and it was very subjective. It could vary depending on many factors, including the person making them to the lighting conditions. So now we use a colorimeter to objectively and consistently measure color. And we also use color charts in some of our photographs so that we can reference what the colors, compare the colors of what we're photographing to the reference card. We've moved to a new data platform that Helen talked called Potato Base. Again, it was developed by Lucas Mueller at the Boyce Thompson Institute in New York. It may not sound very exciting, but when you consider that we have to keep track of literally hundreds of thousands of selections and hundreds of data points for each, and be able to track that across years, data management is one of our main concerns. So this potato base has been really important to our program. We also have mainstreamed the use of state-of-the-art optical sorters for data collection on the potatoes coming from our evaluation trials. These machines can take accurate objective measurements on every single tuber in a sample, giving us more data and the ability to draw better conclusions with our statistical analysis. But we're also excited about what other scientists we work with can do with these machines. So for example, Helen and Kyle Gardner, they are taking extremely detailed data on a wide variety of selections, and then they work their magic with genomics and computational data, which is really not my area of expertise. But what it means in short is that it helps them in their work to develop genomic prediction and selection methods, which when they are done will enable David, our breeder, to make better breeding decisions and transform the way we select parents and progeny. So we should be able to get the traits of interest into our varieties better and faster. So some of you may use a GoPro when you're biking or snowboarding. Well, we're not moving nearly as quickly, but our GoPro is in action. You can see in this first picture, our summer student, Mackenzie. She's holding the GoPro and filming the ground as she walks. The second image is a capture from her progress through the field on June 29th, when just a few selections were emerging. So these images can be analyzed by computer programs to tell us very consistently and objectively about emergence, canopy growth, and vigor of the selections, as well as maturity. So these images are of the same plots on subsequent dates. There's quite a bit of difference between selections by July 5th, and even more so on July 13th. We're working out the best way of using the GoPro and automating image analysis, drawing on the work of other scientists like Jonathan Nielsen, and adapting it to improve our data. Potato disease resistance being a key breeding target for the program, the markers can improve efficiency of selection, as Helen just went into a lot of detail about, and the adoption of marker-assisted selection is part of the modernization of our breeding program aimed at improving genetic gain. So we're working with our plant pathologists, such as Dahu Chen, and a virologist, Dr. Ni, to fully integrate these fast and efficient methods that they develop into our everyday breeding. We have also been changing our experimental designs to use replication earlier and better in the breeding cycle, which gives us data where we can look for site effects that give us clues about traits where it's nearly impossible for us to apply as a controlled treatment, like many of the abiotic stresses. So for example, by using the power of multi-site testing in robust experimental designs, we will be able to identify interesting selections like these, which yielded better than the standard russet Burbank under irrigated conditions, but even more impressive they yielded a further 20% better than Russet Burbank on the dry sites. We've all seen huge changes with climate variability and extreme weather events this last year and over the last few years. So finding selections that perform well under a wide variety of conditions is important to the future success of growers and supply chains. So this list summarizes some of the work of other scientists whose innovations we will integrate into our breeding program over the coming years. Helen spoke of the benefit of genomic prediction models that will identify parents with high priority traits. And I also mentioned using the DNA markers developed by Dr. Nee and others to find resistant selection. And by doing this in the second or third field year, we can also identify potential parents for the crossing block early on in the pipeline. And this is going to increase our genetic gain in the pipeline faster. So I've mentioned some of the things we're trying to do, but just to be clear, the modernization and integrating these innovations, it all works toward our important goals. And these being increasing disease resistance, increasing genetic gain, finding selections that are well adapted to the Canadian climate, and finding selections with desirable traits for the Canadian industry. But breeding is not a short-term endeavor, as Helen mentioned, and as our public science organization, we're also framing our modernization and program to meet the government priorities. So some of you may be aware that a great deal of the public funding for agricultural research and innovations, they run in 5-year cycles that are called policy frameworks. We're in one right now called the Canadian Agriculture Policy Framework, or CAP. And in 2023, we'll begin the next cycle, which we refer to as CAP 2 because we don't know what it's going to be called yet. However, we do know what the priorities will be. And so these two must be priorities for our breeding program. And it's not hard to envision, since these priorities, climate change, economic growth, and sector resilience, these are all things where better varieties can make a difference. So taking a step back to where we are right now under the current CAP, our breeding program has an activity funded under an industry program called the Agri-Science Cluster, or just the cluster. In that activity, we're evaluating promising selections in our national adaptation trials. We're maintaining and multiplying and distributing breeder select seed. And we're identifying potato selections for release to industry. As I mentioned, this used to happen through the accelerated release program, and we're trying to change our commercialization model. So for the last couple of years, we've been just offering some selections non-exclusively. So I have a few of them listed here. And I would just like to take this opportunity before I talk more about the national trials, just to thank the CHC for funding the project, and our field crews, greenhouse crews, and technicians in Alberta and New Brunswick for making it all happen. I like to show this slide because it gives a summary of the national nature of our program. It's perhaps a bit of information overload, showing you which activities of the potato breeding pipeline are carried out in which province. But I also like this slide because it shows you very clearly that AAFC is not alone in this. In fact, there are many moving parts, and a great many of them are carried out by the partners at the universities, consulting companies, and research firms, and others. I can also use this slide to quickly take you across the country and show you where the national trial sites are. So in Alberta, we have Chandra Singh at Lethbridge College and Michelle Conchu at the University of Lethbridge, who run the site there. In Manitoba, there's Darren Gibson at Gaia Consulting. In Ontario, Vanessa Curry with the University of Guelph. In BC, we have Heather Mayberg, who hosts a demonstration site for us. She's with ES Crop Consult. In Saskatchewan, it's done at one of our AAFC sites in Outlook with Jacine Wahab. In Quebec, it's done through André Gagnon with Projust. And in PEI, we have our AAFC person, David Main, and also Mary K. Saunier with the PEI Potato Board. And finally, in New Brunswick, we run the site in collaboration with the New Brunswick Department of Agriculture. So I'd like to thank all of our collaborators for this work. So here's a quick snapshot of the National Potato Variety Trial. The photo shows our New Brunswick site, but this slide shows the direction that we're moving to. So we're moving towards 70% processing selections and 30% fresh market and chip. We're looking at the results from our preliminary trials that happen in Alberta, Ontario, and New Brunswick to decide which selections make it into our national trials. And we're essentially having fewer selections in our trials, but that are of better quality. So I want to take you through 3 examples of material that is currently in the national trial. And here mostly I want to emphasize what we're looking for when we're deciding what moves forward. So we're in the process of developing product profiles. So a lot of these will change. But for now, for French fries, we're trying to find ones that have russet skin, white flesh, that have earlier maturity than russet Burbank, have good specific gravity, long storage, that have disease resistance and climate resilience. So the selection that I'm showing you here is one that meets the product profile. I'm also showing you a picture of the selection in the field and our quality lab, made French fries. I'm showing you a picture of what those look like as well. For the chips, our product profile, again, we're looking at something that has early maturity, that has high specific gravity, but not so high where we're increasing shatter or bruising, that does well in storage, has good quality in storage, disease resistance, and is resilient to climate change. And again, I'm showing you pictures of what the selection looks like in the field and the chips that came out of the selection. Okay, so for fresh market, our product profile, we're moving much more towards red skin and white flesh, slightly smaller size, good appearance, good boil quality with good aftercook darkening, disease resistance, and resilient to climate. And again, here we have a photo of the selection that came out of the field and a sample of the boiled potatoes. So the National Potato Trial represents years 5 and 6 in the potato breeding pipeline. And after that, the selections can be taken by industry members to test under an agreement on their own farms. And after that, if they still like the selection, they may then be licensed and marketed. So the way that happens is being reworked. The idea is that we're designing 3 mechanisms with different segments of industry players to make something that really works. So the 3 mechanisms that we're working towards are, and these are all still under development, but a consortium or club model for the French fry processors. This was where we first directed our efforts. And so it's furthest along, and we're hoping that everything's going to be signed this spring. But essentially, the processors pay an annual membership fee, which enables them to share non-exclusive rights of any of the material that is developed within the consortium. But suppose a variety suitable for another purpose was identified and was not suitable for the processing market, then it can still be offered to other segments through the other mechanisms. For the fresh market and chip, we're thinking that we're going to create a new request for proposals model. So this differs from the past because whereas before it was a simple bid and the highest bidder won, we will forge some sort of a system to assess proposals to ensure that varieties go to parties who have the capacity and interest to actually commercialize them and bring them to market. So we've been doing some research on some ideas of how to do this well, and we are about to enter into consultation with the fresh market industry folks to make sure that we're picking some methods that will work and enable our varieties to be adopted and marketed. We also want to work with private breeders on germplasm exchange, and these are talks that are just beginning now. So I want to show you some examples of the successes in our program. I'm realizing that maybe I'm running out of a little bit of time, so I'm going to go through these quite quickly. But Parkland Seed Potatoes has recently licensed AAC Crimson Tide, and we're seeing some moderate resistance to scab, and it has very good yields. They've also recently licensed AAC Midnight. Quebec Parmentier has recently licensed 2 dual purpose varieties. One of them is this AAC Moccasin, and the other one hasn't been named yet. So we're looking forward to hearing which name they come up with for this one. Croker Farms has recently licensed 3 varieties, AAC Red Rover, AAC Blaze, and AAC Arctic. If anybody wants more information on these, feel free to get in touch. I realized I went through this quite quickly. Okay, so thanks for sticking with me. I promise I'm almost done and there's not going to be a test on this slide. This slide is quite busy, but I think it's important. It's all about how our growers and industry partners can give feedback and how that feedback helps us create better varieties through better decisions. So basically on the left-hand side here, I'm describing some of the ways you can actually participate. For example, you can look at the selections at field days or open houses. You can give us feedback directly, or through someone else like one of our provincial collaborators or an agrologist that you trust. If you participate in the national trials, you can give us feedback at the field days. If you pick up an advanced selection for testing, we want to hear your feedback on these selections. So your feedback can come to me or to David. It really makes no difference, but we really need the feedback to inform our breeding decisions. So I was kind of happy to hear Helen ask which traits people are interested in. I'm looking forward to having that information as well. On the right-hand side here, I'm briefly summarizing our breeding cycle, and all the stars are decision points. The red stars are David's decisions, and all of these can be informed by your feedback. And the green star is a joint decision point between industry and the breeder together. And then there are all the decisions that completely rest with the grower, when it comes to whether or not you register it or what you choose to grow. But even those decisions that are yours, like inform our program. So what I mean by that is if you choose to grow one variety over another, it tells us about what works for you, and that those are the traits that are desirable. And so, like, all this to say that we really want and need your feedback and collaboration. The more we hear about what you like and dislike in our selections, the better job we can do of getting you the better varieties faster. So to end the presentation, I just want to again acknowledge and thank the CHC for funding us along with the industry, and all of our collaborators across the country, and many of the industry members as well. So yeah, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Erica. That was fantastic and a great way to continue on from the conversation we had earlier with Helen Tai about some of the efforts that are happening in Fredericton. We do have a few questions here. We've got a few minutes to answer some. So let's see. There is a question here about the locations across Canada. Are there any locations across Canada that conduct long-term storage suitability testing?
Not for our in the national potato variety trials, but this is something that in part we're doing at home. So we're getting some of the selections from our New Brunswick trial. We've been improving how our storage systems in Fredericton really aren't very good. So we've partnered up with the New Brunswick Department of Agriculture, and we're storing them as industry was. And, we're now testing them, pretty much every 2 months in our cook quality lab. We also take some of the selections and put them in our dormancy trial, where we check on them every week, and see which ones have sprouted.
Excellent. Brian Barrett from the PEI Potato Board also chimed in here to say, don't forget AAC Red Fox has been with the PEI Potato Board. So I just wanted to mention that for him too. And we do have a guest joining us from Argentina, I believe, who has asked a few questions. And I hope we're asking these and trying to get the answer that you're looking for. But which varieties can handle heat stress and or long stretches between low or infrequent moisture or irrigation, but really focusing on the varieties that might be able to handle some of the heat stress that are experienced in warmer climates?
So that's something that, like, we're starting to evaluate now. We're looking at genome by environment interactions. But what I can say as far as some of the checks that we use in our trials, russet Burbank, like we all know, is incredibly susceptible to heat stress. Atlantic seems to do fairly well. And I'm sure there are others. I don't know if David or Helen want to comment on varieties that they know that do very well under drought or heat stress.